Okay, so let us start for our English quarter 1, week number 3. For our lesson for today, for this whole week, is the passive and active voices. So later on, you will be able to identify the difference between the passive and the active voice or voices. Okay, so but before we do that, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mr. Edwino N. Barbosa Jr. So I am your English teacher. So let us start learning and practicing English together. Now, but before we do that, may I request a moment of silence for our prayer? Please bow your heads and feel the presence of our Lord.
Please bow your heads and let us pray. Dear Jesus, please show me how to spend this day sharing your love in every way. Help me to be kind to everyone, to play and laugh and have lots of fun, shining your light and giving your grace, sharing your joy with a smile on my face. Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here. Ever this day be at my side, to light and guard, to rule and guide. Amen.
Okay, amen for that. Now, before we proceed, let us have a few reminders. Of course, number one, be in a very comfortable place. Number two, open your cameras. Number three, mute your microphones unless you are called or expected to recite. And then number four, recitation gives you additional points, of course. Now, for the learning competency, so you will be able to use the passive and active voice meaningfully in varied contexts. The objective of this lesson is to differentiate active and passive voice of the verb, transform statements from active voice to passive voice and vice versa, use active and passive voice in varied context. Now I would like you to open your module on page 13, and then we have to answer the first learning task for this week. So the direction says, let us have a game by knowing who had the sweetest parents, guardians during your childhood days. Write your answer on a short bond paper. So in our case, we're not going to use short bond paper. We're going to use, as usual, intermediate pad, okay? So here are the following questions. Okay, so here are the following questions. When you were a child, were you given a pasalubong by your parents? Okay. Were you allowed to play outside with your friends? Were you able to get a reward for every good thing you've done? Were you given a baon amounting to 20 pesos and above? And then were you allowed to watch TV from time to time? So all of your answer to these questions will be written on a one whole piece of intermediate pad. Next, were you fetched by your parents or guardians in school? Were you given time to concentrate on your studies? Were you allowed to use gadgets from time to time? Were you taught positive values at home? Were you taken any facilities, or were you taken to any facilities such as mall, park, etc.? Okay, so your answers will be a categorical yes or no, and then your additional explanation to support your answer. Okay? For example, for the question, were you given time to concentrate on your studies? If your answer is yes, then it doesn't have to be just a merely yes. Or in fact, we are encouraging to explain, to elaborate your answers. For example, were you given time to concentrate on your studies? Answer: yes, I was given time to concentrate on my studies. In fact, my parents are encouraging me to concentrate on my studies every day, at least um, for a period of 2 hours or 3 hours a day. So that's how you're going to answer each question. You're not just going to state a mere categorical yes or no. Instead, you are going to furthermore elaborate your answer by giving your justifications, by giving your the memories that you remembered during those days. Okay? So, answer yes and then state your explanation. Okay? Not just yes or no for that matter. Okay? And then, after that, we are going to find out whether you are having the sweetest parents or guardians by the following equivalency. Okay. If you answered yes, so one yes is equivalent to 1 point. Now, for each yes, you will be getting 1 to 5 yes or yeses will be moderately sweet. 6 to 8 yes, sweet. Okay, and 9 to 10 yes will be very sweet for that matter. Now remember that given statements are just some of the ways on how our parents, guardians can show their sweetness to us. There are still other ways which may not be indicated above as to how they can let us feel how they love us or how we matters to them at most. Now for the learning task number 2, write A if the statement is in active voice and P if it is in passive voice. Write your answer on a piece of one whole intermediate pad paper, okay? Okay, for the question number 1 or for the sentence number 1, we have the doctor visited her patients in the hospital. So your answer will be just a simple A or P. A for active voice and P for passive voice. If you think that the subject in the sentence number 1 is in active voice, then you write A. If you think it is in passive voice, however, you write letter P. The same is true for items number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 6, 7, 8, 9, and also number 10. Okay, all of your answers will be written on a piece of paper. Now, for the voices of the verb, let us try to discuss. So we have two types or two classifications of as to the voices. Okay, the voices of the verb focus on the function of the subject being either the doer or performer or the receiver of the action. They are classified to as active and passive. Okay, so basically we are talking about the subject. Okay. So let us identify first what is the subject. The subject is the one we are talking about in a sentence. Okay. Now, if that subject is the doer, of the action, therefore, that is in active voice. However, if the subject of the sentence is the receiver of the action, therefore that is in passive voice. Another characteristic of the passive voice is that the doer of the action in passive voice is introduced by the preposition by. Okay. So let us have an example. Sorry. Okay. Now, we have here the example sentence. The teachers prepared the materials for their classes. So what is the subject? So we have here the subject teachers. And what is the predicate? So the predicate is the materials. Now, who is the doer of the action here? If the answer is the teacher, let us go back, okay? So, active voice, it says that it occurs when the subject of the sentence acts as the performer or doer of the action. Now, in our example, you can note that the teacher is actually the doer of the action. Doer of the action. Someone who does the action. Okay. The teachers, being the subject, is the doer of the action. And what was the action? The action is the verb prepared. Okay. The teachers prepared. What did the teachers prepare? So, the predicate comes in. Okay, the word materials is your predicate and at the same time the receiver of the action. Right? So, the teacher is the subject, whereas these teachers are also the doer of the action. What was the action again? The teachers prepared. Okay. Prepared. The word prepared is your action. And then your receiver of the action is the word materials, which is the predicate on this sentence. Now, for the second examples, the materials were prepared by the teachers for their classes. So, let us go back to the definition of the passive voice. It says that in passive voice, subject of the sentence is the receiver of the action. Right? And then, in passive voice, the doer of the action is introduced by the preposition by. The word by. Okay. Now, let us go back to the example. Alright. Now, the materials were prepared by the teachers for their classes. So, what is your subject? Your subject in this sentence is the word material. Okay? Or materials. And the doer of the action is not the subject in this type of sentence. Okay? The doer of the action is the predicate, which is preceded by the word or the preposition by. So as you can see, there is a change when it comes to the subject and the predicate. So they change positions. Okay. So, on your first example, the word teachers is your subject. However, on the second example, your subject is no longer the word teachers. Instead, it became the word materials. So, as you can see, there is um, an interchange, okay? An interchange of their position, right? So the subject in passive voice, it becomes the predicate. And then the predicate in the active voice becomes the subject in the passive voice. So there is a change. Now let us go back again to the definition for further explanation. Again, active voice occurs when the subject of the sentence act as the performer or doer of the action. And then, for the passive voice, subject of the sentence is the receiver of the action. Another notable characteristic of the passive voice is the use of the preposition by. Okay. So, in here, you can clearly see that the doer of the action on the first example is the subject, thereby making it an active voice. However, in passive voice, the subject, the subject material is actually the receiver of the action and not the doer of the action. The doer of the action in passive voice is not the subject. Right. Next. So, in the given example for the active voice, the subject teachers is the doer of the action. In the example for the passive voice, the subject materials is not the doer of the action, but the receiver of the action, as the doer is already found in the predicate. So, as I was saying, there is a change in position of the subject and the predicate. So that is notable. And one more notable thing is the use of the preposition by in the example of passive voice. Now, in transforming a verb from active voice to passive voice or vice versa, take note of the tense of the verb. If the verb in active voice is in present tense, the passive should be also in passive voice. Again, if the verb in action or if the verb in active voice is in present tense, the passive voice should also be in passive voice and vice versa. However, the form of the verb as to S or simple forms vary depending on the number of the subject. In passive voice, the main verb is usually introduced by an auxiliary verb. So, simple present tense. Active voice. Jason prepares his meal. So, we have here the subject. And what is the subject? That is the name Jason. And what is the action? Prepares. Okay? That is your verb. And the word prepares is in what form? Of course, it is in simple present tense. And we have here the receiver of the action, his meals. Right. Subject, Jason. Action, prepares, which is a verb in simple present tense, and then the receiver of the action, his meals. Now, as for the passive voice, take a closer look. His meals are prepared by Jason. Right? So, we're going to actually change the subject. Okay? Put the the receiver of the action into the first part of the sentence, his meals. Okay? And then thereby necessarily changing the auxiliary verb, okay, are prepared. Okay? Are, auxiliary verb are, and the word prepared by Jason. Okay, your subject in the previous active voice. Right. Next. Active voice. Ethan informed his clients on the status of their order. So, on the passive voice, we have his clients were informed by Ethan on the status of their order. So, as you can see, there is a change into the subject. In the active voice, the subject is Ethan, and the doer of the action. However, the receiver of the action is his clients. Okay. Now, in the passive voice, however, the receiver of the action becomes the subject, his clients. And then, thereby changing your auxiliary verb, okay, or adding the word the auxiliary verb were to the word informed, and then the notable use of the preposition by, and then your previous subject Ethan, okay, so had been changed into positions. Next, for the simple future tense, for the active voice, of course, the use of will. So the students will submit their reports tomorrow. Okay? The word will signifies future event, something that is about to happen, or something that will happen in the future. So for example, we have the students will submit their reports tomorrow. So the word tomorrow and will signifies that the action will be done in the future. So we have here the students will submit their report tomorrow. The students being the subject, the action will submit, and then the receiver of the action reports. Right? Now, in the passive voice, okay, there is a notable change with the use of the word be. Okay? The auxiliary verb be. So their reports will be submitted, and then what we are saying a while ago, the use of the preposition by, and then the students tomorrow. So as you can see, in the active voice, the subject is the students. In the passive voice, the subject is reports or their reports. Okay? There is a change in position, okay, as to their location in the sentence. Now, for the present perfect tense in the active voice, Sorry. Now, the school has decided to shut off its operation. So what is your subject? The school. What is the action? Has decided to shut off. And what is the receiver of the action? Its operation. Okay, as to the passive voice, take a look. A closer look will tell you that there had been a change into position of the previous receiver of the action, which was in active voice. It was located on the last part, while in the passive voice it becomes the subject. It is located in the beginning of the sentence. So to read it in full, its operation has been decided to shut off by the school. Right? So your subject now is its operations or operations. And then you have the has been decided. So that is passive in present perfect tense. To shut off by the school. So take a look, a very close look as to the difference of the active and passive voice in present perfect tense. So in most cases, this is what happens. Now for the past perfect tense, past perfect, okay? Active voice, Athena had. Take a look at the word had. Had signifies here that the action had been perfected already or had been done already. So that is why we call it past perfect. Okay? Athena had studied English before she moved to the US. Okay. The subject here is the word Athena. Your action is had studied. And the doer of, the receiver of the action rather is the word English. Okay? So you will take note that in passive voice, again, there is a change or an exchange of location in terms of their position in the sentence. The word English was actually in the middle part of the sentence in active voice, whereas in passive voice it becomes in the first part of the sentence. Okay? And then your subject Athena had become or had been placed in the middle part in exchange to the word English. Okay? And then a notable use of the word had been studied. Okay? For the active voice, had studied. For the passive voice, had been studied by Athena before she moved to the US. For the future perfect tense, active voice, example, we have Anthony will have baked the cake before he leaves. Okay, the word Anthony or the name Anthony is your subject. Anthony is the doer of the action, therefore it is in active voice. And the notable use of the word will have denotes that the future or the action is in future perfect tense. Future, meaning to say something that will happen after the issuance of the sentence, okay, or the statement, or in the future to be exact. Okay, Anthony will have baked the cake before he lives. So take note of the use of will plus the word have plus your verb baked. However, in passive voice, the cake becomes your subject, which is in active voice is the receiver of the action, right? So in passive voice, uh, the receiver of the action is the subject. Okay. And a notable use of the word will plus the word have plus been plus the verb baked in future perfect tense by Anthony before he leaves. So basically, you will just have to uh, memorize uh, this rule in changing active voice into passive voice in relation to the tenses. Okay? So active and passive voices of the verbs may also occur in the progressive tense. Something that is progressing, something that is actually currently happening and still happening. Okay. Now I would like you to open your modules on page 15 and answer learning task number 4. For the learning task number 4, you need to convert the following sentence from active voice to passive voice. Write your answers on a short, okay, we're not going to use shortman paper, we're going to use intermediate pad instead. Okay? So convert from active, convert the sentence to passive voice. Answers only on your intermediate pad. Okay. So we have here items number 1 to 5. So you're going to write your answers. Answers only. Okay? So the mayor, for example, we have number 1, the mayor declared a state of calamity. So these are actually in active voice. What you're going to do is to convert this into a passive voice or a passive one. So if you need to go back to the examples, you may do so. You can always go back to those examples. The same is true with items number 2, 3, 4, and 5 as well. So after answering that, you need to do the opposite in learning task number 5. So these sentences are in passive voice. You have to convert it into active voice. So this learning task is the opposite task for task number 4. So 5 examples as well. All you have to do is to write down your answers. Again, number 4 or learning task number 4 is in active voice to be converted to passive voice. However, learning task number 5 is in passive voice to be converted in active voice. Right? After that, you have to open your modules on page 16 and write A if the statement is in the active voice. This is your learning task number 7. And P if it is in passive voice. Then, transform each statement from active to passive and vice versa. Write your answers on our piece of paper, one whole piece of paper, intermediate pad. So we have here an example. Noli Me Tangere is considered by experts as an enlightening novel. So the statement number 1 or the sentence number 1 was given out by the word by. So if you're going to look back to your definition or to the characteristics of the passive voice, it says here that passive voice uses the word or the preposition by. So therefore, item item number 1 is in passive voice. So your answer for number 1 is passive voice or P. Okay? The mere P, letter P for passive voice. Number 1 is P. And then you're going to convert this sentence from passive voice going to active voice. So that's how you're going to answer learning task number 7. So the same is true with items number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, for the last part is your reflection. Complete the following phrases. I understand that. And then, I realize that all shall be written in one whole piece of paper to be submitted this coming Friday. With that, I am hoping that you would all study your lessons, do your job, do your part in this learning process, and be a good kid, be a good child to your parents. Okay? Walang lalabas dahil marami pa ring nagkakasakit. So, pangalagaan natin ang ating kalusugan, no? With that, thank you everyone and thanks for listening.